Welcome back to Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host today, John Maley, bringing back Glenn Koepke and Joe Lombardo. Gentlemen, we started talking about segmentation from all perspectives, and now we're navigating to translation to routing guide management, RFPs. Where are we going? And Glenn, share with us what you see as a successful strategy.
Yeah. So, first you got to start with customer segmentation, which we've talked about previously. So who are my key customers? Who are my strategic ones? Who are the niche players? Who are my transactional ones? Right. So on that Friday, if 4 o'clock happens, maybe those sales really aren't critical because
They're
frankly,
transactional.
they're transactional, right? You got other key players like a Walmart, Target, Amazon that you've got to service, but that one-off small business that unfortunately just isn't a big player and it's not key to your overall enterprise strategy. You got to think twice. So just because they're small doesn't mean they're not important. That's one thing that's important. One of the categories I usually classify as these niche companies, right? So niche usually covers a lot of those key companies, key brands, emerging and so on. But once you understand that, then it comes down to how do you work with your carriers, right? A lot of companies leverage a TMS. As a part of that TMS, you get a routing guide. And one of the nice things with routing guides is you get efficiencies. The downside of a routing guide is that you don't necessarily get the relationships. I know, John, you and I have talked a lot about that, but having been a TMS guy for a long time, I see the benefits that it creates to efficiency, but you cannot forget the relationship aspect, right? I think that ultimately, when you look at what differentiates company A versus company B in transportation, yes, it's the ease of doing business, but that relationship stands out as kind of that X factor that exists. And so when you think of routing guide players, the way I always look at it is if you segment your customers in 5 categories, right? So strategic is number 1, emerging, 3 is niche, 4 is transactional, 5 is commodity, right? And there's some different Pareto rules out there of how what that really means from a count of customers and split of revenue. And the way I would suggest is your strategic customers, your emerging customers, and your niche customers, you really need a routing guide approach that is a combination of ease of doing business, performance, and a competitive rate. And so that's critical. When you think of your transactional customers and your commodity customers, that is where I call it a budget-based award, or you just truly go to spot market. And it's a combination of cost plus, key importance of that customer. There are too many times that, if you're one of your strategic customers, hey, another carrier fell off, or all of a sudden, they do a product promotion, right? Walmart does a promotion, stuff's flying off the shelves, which is great. I need, 3 truckloads of X moved, right? It's Thursday night. I need a move tomorrow to deliver Saturday. And, for those listening, think about how many times you heard the answer, well, your rate's too much, right? And if I've got a sale of, 3 truckloads that may be $150,000, is my rate that's perceived $200 more really too much or not, right? I think it's transportation is often a fraction of the overall sales cost. And if you're nickel and diming about your strategic customers, your emerging customers, and your niche, you really got to rethink your overall approach with your partners.
The key word there is partners. Now, if that's a partner, you probably don't have a problem if it's truly a partner, right? So when we talk in the previous episode, we talked about segmentation. Your strategic, your emerging, your niche, those are like 1, 2, 3 of your priorities. That's the pecking chart. That's the hierarchy, right? Absolutely. Then you get down to the transactional and then the commodities. And the transactional and the commodities are, you absolutely will help them if you can, if it's available. But you probably can't go out on a limb for them because they're lowest cost or there's something wrong. That's why they're down there, right? So let's chop that up a little bit, Glenn, and talk about why that is. Because if you don't identify and prioritize, who's gonna get that Thursday night at 11 o'clock support or 10 p.m. or Friday night at midnight, or, those type of things for a truck to come in on Friday and deliver Saturday, or pick up Saturday and deliver Sunday morning, more of above and beyond. Those are the ones that you're going to go above and beyond for because you have the relationship, which we spoke about. It's not budget-based routing guide. You're there because you're there to bring a value. And you do bring a value consistently.
When you think of your key partners, you've got to get commitments in place, right? That we talked about consistency on a previous episode makes life a heck of a lot easier. So get committed capacity that's consistent, and then you really got to base your selection off performance. And when you're in need as a shipper, with your strategic customers, your emerging customers, you got to pick the right provider that's going to get it there on time. There's too many lost sales. There's too many headaches because someone is trying to nickel and dime, even with a key partner that's there, right? And I think when you look at the incentive, procurement folks are incented by savings, right? And there's this clash with customer service, which is customer service wants the best carrier regardless of price. And so you've got to get on the same page. You can't be doing it last minute load to load. You've got to have this kind of planned through your network. And really the best way to do that is, who your customers are, how they're segmented. When you go to your routing guide approach, you have the right routing guide approach for the right customer style. And then when spot freight happens or last minute freight happens, you already know what to do, right? You're either going to your narrow list of partners or you're going out to a broader spot market, and what's service-based and what's cost-based.
I like the way Glenn segmented different carriers. Again, one thing that I try to look at, and when I was, running a transportation operation, is you have to look at total delivered cost. And I Glenn alluded to that, and it's not just the rate, but you've got to look at ease of doing business, the communication, all those soft things also. And if you want to talk about bids or RFPs, the thing I like to tell my people is how are we going to go to market? How are we going to market these particular facilities, these particular loads? And you got to make sure that you, as a shipper, you segment your own business. You may have, a production facility. It's drop and hook. It's easy business. For a carrier that has assets. Versus distribution center where you've got mixed loads and palletized versus non-palletized versus stop versus non-stop. So I guess the message there is you really need to understand your business and what you're putting on the street to the carriers, and making sure the information is credible and timely and current.
What you're getting at, Joe, is this concept. I call it like package bids. I think too many times companies are taking the whole farm and throwing it out to bid, and frankly, It upsets your partners a lot, where it questions all the effort, investments, and equipment and people and relationships. But just because you have a lot of freight, putting it all to bid at once doesn't mean you're going to get a lower rate. So think of a concept of package bids, right? If I already have lanes that are humming, the relationship strong, the consistency strong, the performance, leave those there, right? Don't include them. Go to set for a certain segment of your business, whether it's site, customer, supplier, you name it, and think about that. And this concept of a package bid is also a lot less stress. There's way too many times people throw the whole farm out. They take 3 months on the bid, takes them a month to go live, and all of a sudden the carrier says, well, that's different what you quoted, and you're no better off, right? And then it leads to all this last minute kind of spot freight that's out there. So think of package bids. It'll make you a heck of a lot more efficient. It's a lot easier on your carriers. It's a lot easier on your customer service teams too.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I far too often we see things misrepresented in bids, or key things left out. No details, right? Say, you can bid on a lane. Let's say it goes from Columbus, Ohio to Connecticut, right? And it shows, okay, 50% of the time it has a stop on it. Then you find out the stop is Long Island, and the receiver only receives 2 days of the week or 3 days of the week during these hours. So now, your whole goal for going to bid was to put it out there and try and find the right people for the right lanes. You can't bid that, and you have to be honest and say you can't bid that to be the same rate per mile as the 1-and-1 that goes straight to Connecticut with a reasonable receiver. So when you get the order, you're saying, hey, it's actually cheaper for me to go to Connecticut and then come back to Long Island than it is to wait the extra 2 days for the receiving window to open back up because they only receive these days, right? So you have to say this isn't what it was presented as.
Yeah, there's a couple things that are fascinating about, I think, this industry. Number one is the way shippers contract. It's not a guarantee, right? Just because I'm number one in the routing guide doesn't mean I need to take it, right?
Right.
And so in Europe, there's some different models, but in the U.S., it's kind of this handshake anyway, which is it's a very transportation specific thing. So I think of all these folks I've worked with through my life that came from other industries, and it took them forever to figure this out, and they could never come to terms with it. So number one, what's fascinating is just because you said that, hey, I'm number one, doesn't mean I actually have to take it. And that can have a lot of effects on a network. The other thing is it's fascinating is the incumbent is severely penalized in this industry. And it does not matter if you are a carrier, a technology company, a service provider. It's one of the fascinating things where the incumbent is so severely penalized because of all this unknown that exists somewhere, but not in the one that's leading the bid. And I think when I was running bids before, one of the things I always did is I would set a plus minus, right? So if I have a lane that I'm going to go out to bid for, come up with a plus minus factor that as long as the incumbent is within that, they're going to keep the business regardless. And so if you think of the procurement person's job is to show cost savings. Cost savings does not mean the lowest price feasible. That may never actually happen on paper, right? And so think of this concept of, gosh, if my incumbent is just within plus or minus X, they keep the business regardless, and I can then show my savings or my award based on that. It'll make your life easier as a carrier manager or as a procurement lead if you follow that approach.
Absolutely. As always, definitely enjoyed having you on, Glenn. Joe, same to you. Can't thank you both enough. And to add to what you said, Glenn and Joe, at the end of the day, if I'm listening correctly, to try and summarize everything, people and the relationships are what you got to have on either whether the market's tight, whether the market's loose. We try to avoid both extremes. We don't want to be highest when the market's up. We don't want to be down on the bottom when it's low. We want to bring consistency to it. So, I think that is would be a bigger value than riding the up and down wave to any shipper. But thank you both for being on Stay in Your Lane, for participating, and we'll talk to you soon.